Afternoon. Welcome to the Pinkham channels. This is notionally our team news reaction video, but unfortunately for us, Norwich City haven't put out their lineup for their second pre-season friendly of the summer against German second-tier side Jahn Regensburg. So we're just going to be sort of looking ahead to the game, previewing it a little bit, talking about the various goings on at Norwich City at the moment. Since this is why we're here, though, we'll kick off with the game. What are you sort of expecting to see from the teams? I think probably the headline where we're concerned is that it doesn't look like Isaac Hayden's been training with the team while they've been out in Germany.
Absolutely, Sam. Yeah. We were told he wasn't involved in the open training session, which was Thursday from memory. So do we deduce that he hasn't done a lot with the group during the week? To go right back to the first pre-season friendly last Friday at Dereham, we were all there at Aldis Park. Isaac Hayden watching brief, and Dean Smith said after that game, essentially that it was a game or two early with the hard pitches. We know the backstory here that he missed second part of last season with that knee injury at Newcastle in December. Wasn't then fit enough to be in Newcastle's redeclared 25-man Premier League squad. So essentially he's missed, where are we now? 6, 7, 8 months of football, and clearly Norwich were of a mind to ease him gradually back in. But, as we're led to believe, he didn't take part in the training session on Thursday. Didn't look like, I've seen their latest tour video that's gone out earlier today, that he was doing too much beyond Thursday either, really. So time will tell, and hopefully very imminently, if they do put out the lineups. Kickoff is British time, 1 p.m, so we're just over 50 minutes away. You'd expect some sort of team news to go out on their channels between now and then. But what I don't expect is to see Isaac Hayden, because he was not really trained yet. And Dean Smith was softly with him last week. Then that probably is going to apply again. For me, more interestingly, I think we probably will see Andrew Omobamidele. They had a practice game at their base just between themselves earlier in the week. He played in that. It was quite impressive by all accounts. We know, again, he's another one who essentially wasn't available to Dean Smith last season with that lower back issue, but he's now fighting fit, and clearly new deal in his back pocket start of the summer. A big player for Norwich City moving forward. So if he comes back in today, that to me is the big positive. And of course, beyond that, all the internationals came back in midweek. You'd maybe expect to see 20 minutes here or there from the likes of Pukki, Rashica, Hanley, but still relatively early on for them. So I think it's going to be more or less the personnel who we had at Aldis Park last Friday night.
Yeah, there's obviously, along with Omobamidele, the likes of Adam Eder and Josh Sargent. When we spoke to Dean Smith following that Dereham game, he sort of referenced the fact that maybe Aldis Park wasn't the greatest venue for recently injured players. We've seen Sam Byram involved in training as well. Would you expect to see those three, Sargent, Eder and Byram, involved today?
Eder, I'm not too sure, because again, from what we understand, he's done a lot of individual work this week as well. Again, feel like I keep referring back to injuries, but the knee injury that he suffered against Crystal Palace, I think it was in January, having really looked like he was coming to the party. The first Premier League goal in that win over Everton, and then he was impressive again at Watford the following game. But I'd be surprised if we see him, certainly from the start. I mean, the interesting thing will be the approach. Last Friday night at Dereham, Dean Smith went with two completely different 11s. He's got that potential to do that again and a bit more, really. Now he's got the likes of Omobamidele and Eder, maybe, and Sargent, and the internationals available. So possibly we'll see a little bit of Adam Eder. I wouldn't think we'd see him from the start, because, again, if he's still not fully integrated in the group at this stage so early on in pre-season, although I say that, I look down at the date, and 3 weeks today? I think they're at Cardiff, so it's not that early in pre-season in the bigger picture. But Sargent, he is training with the group, as is Byram. So Byram, yeah, I'd like to see a bit of Sam Byram, because, again, he clearly looks like another big player who Dean Smith is going to lean on pretty heavily in the season ahead. So you'd like to see him back in and involved as soon as possible. Sargent, maybe a bit of kid gloves, but I think he's a little bit further along in his road to recovery from the ankle issue that he had. So of the three, I probably expect less minutes today for Adam Eder. But it's all positive. We're talking about players who were unavailable to Dean Smith towards the end of last season. Whether it would have altered the outcome in terms of survival in the Premier League, unlikely, but certainly what they're going into now, Adam Eder fully fit and carrying on from where he left off all day long. Sam Byram, likewise, on Bama Daily, we've already talked about. And Byram, if Byram stays fit, there's no doubt, ability-wise, he can really add something to Norwich in the Championship.
Yeah, a lot of our discussion after that Dereham game, we spoke on the Pinkham podcast about that game, and we spent most of it caveating it with the fact that it was against Dereham and you can't read too much into it. I know you don't tend to read too much into the early stages of pre-season. Now they're up against a team that plays, obviously the standard of the Zweite Bundesliga isn't quite up there with the Championship, but it is, to all intents and purposes, the equivalent division in Germany to the one that Norwich are in England. Are you ready to start reading into things today, or do you think they probably need a couple more weeks to get the fitness back into the players and a little bit more time for Dean Smith to spend with them before we can start drawing conclusions as to what Norwich City are going to look like for the 2022-23 Championship season?
Yeah, a little bit too early for me to be drawing conclusions when we sort of talked about it after Dereham in terms of that shape that we saw, the 3 and the 3, and how that was maybe a clear signal of where Dean wanted to go. Actually, I'm just going to, because while you were talking there, Sam, somebody who was at the game today, they've just sent me a message, and their understanding, so we assume this will be the case, is that they're going to play 3 30 minutes. So it's those infernal US NFL style, not quite to that degree. I remember a few Cambridge United one pre-season where we had was it the 4 half-an-hour game, and it just went on. And
yeah,
on.
That rings a bell.
Yeah, I think there's 1 or 2 of it. But the plan is, time will tell, but the plan is 3 30-minute games. Some of the players will then play an hour. So very much by definition, if that's how it's going to be, 30 minutes break, 30 minutes with new personnel break, 30 minutes again. So mix and match. To go back to your question, then it clearly is still very much in the fitness side of the pre-season, rather than this is what it looks like for Cardiff, or this is the clues that maybe we could take forward and apply to Cardiff. If that is the format today, then it's going to be very much minutes into players and then top up fitness work they've done this week in Germany, and then of course they fly back tomorrow to the UK. That's the plan, tomorrow morning, and then at the Walks, Kings Lynn Town, Tuesday night, and of course this day next week over in France, a rather glamour opponent in Marseille. So maybe, with the greatest respect to Kings Lynn in midweek, I'm sure they'll bring the personnel there to the Walks, but maybe Marseille onwards is when we'll start to really see pointers to what a Dean Smith team will look like at Cardiff.
Yeah, I was going to raise that actually. It's quite strange that now, having sort of started to ramp things up with a foreign pre-season schedule and games against a higher level team, that they now return and in a couple of days will play National League, I think North or South opposition on Tuesday, before then facing the League 2 side, or League 1, sorry. I think the week after that. So it is going to be a bit strange and a bit difficult to read perhaps over this pre-season. But I'll move on to another subject, because I did tease people a little bit on our Twitter account with mention of Gabriel Sara, a man that we know Norwich are chasing. Looks like it's pretty far down the line. What's your understanding of the situation at the moment, Paddy?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much in a nutshell, Sam. You've put the piece up today, which is the latest overnight from Brazilian media, who clearly very well connected in and around São Paulo. And they're basically saying that it is now at the stage where the fees are agreed, financial elements are agreed, both player and the personal terms, but also crucially club to club. It's just the structure of the payments now. I mean, that report that we've ran today, that you've ran, suggests that São Paulo want 50% of the reported £12 million package up front, and then the remainder in instalments. Norwich looking at a longer term payment plan, but that report stresses that it's not going to be a deal breaker. If the clubs are at that stage and the player is happy to embark on the next stage of his career with Norwich in the English Championship, then it's all systems go. There is the element, of course, that the medical. This is a player that seems to become a bit of an injury themed broadcast. But he is a player still coming back from the right ankle injury, not played since March, April, I think it's safe to say, and not expected to be back from August onwards. So you've got a player who's essentially not fully fit, what does that indicate in terms of the medical? It clearly, there doesn't seem to be any sense on either side, the Brazilian side or the Norwich side, that would be a deal breaker. But of course, it's a hurdle that has to be crossed. The regulations, the work permit, the Brexit regulations, none of those would present an issue. He's at a significant high level that would clear that threshold, no problem at all, as opposed to when they brought in Dimi Yanulis and he was right on the cut line and they had to, I think, go down the appeal route to get him in. That won't be the issue here. So, interestingly, the other element for me that was quite interesting was that because he's still rehabbing, he's going to stay in Brazil. That report that overnight has emerged for the next 3 weeks. So that would suggest we probably won't see him on Norfolk soil probably much before the start of August. But never say never. Never say these are done deals, because they can break down at the 11th hour. We've all seen it, not Norwich per se, but more broadly, these deals can collapse. But there's clearly a willingness to use Dean Smith's measure when he actually, towards the end of last season, and he was talking more about outs, but he said it more broadly. Any transfer deal has to take place, 3 parties, buying club, selling club, player, all in agreement. We would appear to be at that stage here. So Gabriel Sara, barring an unforeseen late twist, will be a Norwich City player, and very, very intriguing piece of business. I think we'd all agree. And also, again, we're talking about Dean Smith's philosophy, style, what he wants his Norwich team to look like. There's a very clear signal that there's the parallels with the Aston Villa team he constructed with Douglas Luiz, was it, John McGinn, particularly in that midfield. Very athletic, very aggressive, very good on the ball technically, but also their physical output. And that clearly, allied to Isaac Hayden coming in earlier this summer, is an area Dean Smith felt was in desperate need of being addressed. And, obviously Hayden needs to get himself fully fit, as does potentially Gabriel Sara. But if they do, you would think that would dramatically increase Norwich's ability to compete physically in the Championship. So it's an exciting one, because anybody knows anything about football generally, you don't have to have a deep understanding of Brazilian football, South American football, but São Paulo are one of the biggest clubs in Brazil. They're competing currently in the Europa League equivalent, the second tier competition for the whole of South America, the Copa Sudamericana, and they're into the quarterfinals. So for me, if Norwich were signing a player from a team who are in the quarterfinals of the Europa League, and I've said, and his age profile as well, really exciting signing. And again, it feels like a bit of a throwback. A lot of focus inevitably was on last summer's recruitment and what didn't happen. But this feels, again, quite innovative and, dare I say it, maybe ahead of the curve again, which is where Norwich, in the best periods of transfer activity under the Webber era, have been. You think Buendia now, don't you? Think Pookie to a degree, and so on. So, yeah, we won't get completely carried away, but if the deal gets done, as it appears to be heading that way, various timescales you hear, it could be the next day or two that this is concluded and confirmed. If that is the case, clearly we'll have to wait 3 or 4 weeks and probably a little bit longer. You can't expect him to come in, particularly a 23-year-old coming from South American football, and drop him straight into the Championship, irrespective of he's been out since March. So I think there'll have to be a fair degree of patience shown, but at some point, maybe a month or so into the season, if Gabriel Sara is in a Norwich shirt, very interesting.
Yeah, for those that haven't seen the story, I'd encourage you to go to pinkham.com for full context. But just to sort of round it up, the idea coming from Brazilian media is that a £12 million fee has been agreed, but that Sao Paulo are keen to raise funds this summer, so they want at least 6 million. As things stand, they want at least £6 million this summer. Obviously, negotiations are ongoing in Norwich, and Stuart Webber will hope that they can get that figure down. But you'd think that either way, it's going to be a significant outlay. Where will that sit, do you think, Paddy, with their summer more broadly? Is that going to be the end of their spending if they have to lay out such a significant chunk?
What's interesting, before we came on live, Sam, we were talking about, the way Stuart Webber framed it was at the end of last season, in that club interview, was essentially they could do 1 or 2 pieces, and they wanted to do that so Dean would be able to put his stamp on the squad, and clearly Isaac Hayden was the first signal of that. But anything beyond that, which I think most of us took to be of a substantial nature, would hinge on out. So, unless they've found a few quid down the back of a sofa somewhere at Carrow Road, I think what we're talking about is a degree of confidence that as this transfer window evolves, some of the players who may attract interest, that will turn into departures and as a result bring in funds that would cross off whatever the outlay is. Again, worth reiterating, hypothetically at this stage, although increasingly likely, Gabriel Sara. I think said it to our colleague Connor yesterday. I mean, this is pretty astute if you think about it. If Norwich had done it the other way around and tried, maybe selling a Max Aarons, we'll say, right at the start of the window, then gone looking for targets, you might have found a few extra quid on the price tags because clubs, whether they're in Europe or further afield, know Norwich are flush with money. And of course, people might shoot back at me, well, that's exactly what happened last summer. They had to get Buendia out the door early. But I think the imperative there was they had to do that in order to do the business that they wanted to do ahead of going back to the Premier League. So I think in an ideal world, you'd want to do it this way around, which is bring in a player and then possibly move on a player. I think...
just to cut across. Sorry to cut across you, Paddy, but we can finally bring you the news we've been hoping to for about 20 minutes, and that is Norwich's starting 11. It's Angus Gunn in goal, Sam Byram at right back, Christoph Zimmerman and Ben Gibson paired at centre back, Sam McCallum at left back, a midfield of Jakob Sorensen, Pierre Lees-Malou and Todd Cantwell behind a front three of Kieran Dowell on the right, Milo Rashica on the left and Josh Sargent up front. Substitutes are Michael, and you'd expect obviously all of these to be involved a significant amount. Michael McGovern, Max Aarons, Bally Mumba, Grant Hanley, Demetrius Giannoulis, Jonathan Tompkinson, Kenny McLean, Liam Gibbs, John Rowe, Erno Hernandez, Daniel Sinani, Christos Jolis, Jordan Hugill and Teemu Pukki. A name that's just stood out to me is Bally Mumba, because our understanding is that his loan to Plymouth is pretty much pending, and that looks like it's going to happen. Could well be a case of them just trying to get him a few minutes out in Germany before he goes on that loan. What's your initial reaction to that 11, Paddy? It's interesting to me that Milo Rashica starts, having just returned from obviously international duty. What do you think of that?
That is relatively surprising. More unsurprising is no Hayden and no Ida. Following on from what we said earlier, what our understanding was in terms of where they are along the fitness path, that doesn't surprise me. Whether one or two Norwich fans are getting a little bit concerned that Isaac Hayden is yet to plug back in, as it were, but in all reality, we probably won't get a touch point with Dean Smith until we get to Kings Lynn on Tuesday. So, rest assured, if we get to Kings Lynn as well, and there's no Isaac Hayden, that's clearly a line we'll try and uncover a bit more detail. But to me, it tells me that he's still, not at the level he needs to be physically to be considered. And if you're not training with the group, then clearly, there's a few hurdles to cross there. Likewise, Ida, although, there's been plenty of video output this week through the club's media channels that Ida is out there, he's working, but still just at that individual one-to-one stage. So you would think, unless he has any sort of setback, Kings Lynn onwards, we'd start seeing him on team sheets and substitute benches. Mumba, that is our understanding that's essentially when he gets back to the UK, that Plymouth loan, club who just missed out on the League One playoffs last season, that will go through. Hence why, Byram's in there clearly. McCallum, well, again, Giannoulis, if he's only come back to the group midweek, I know we're talking about Rashica in the same boat, but another chance to have a look at McCallum. Maybe they know what they're going to get with Giannoulis, if you Smith, Shakespeare, Bramley, Russell. And then I'm just looking further forward, Sargent. Yeah, that's a good sign. We'll remain to see how they line up. But if we're going to say 4-3-3, then for me it's clearly Byram on the right, Zimmerman, Gibson, McCallum, middle three of Sorensen, Lees-Malou, Cantwell, and then you've got, as the lights go out, metaphorically, you've got Sargent flanked by Dowell and Rashica. So, Yeah, I mean, I wrote a piece midweek, funnily enough, about Sargent and is this his time now? You know, those quotes that really allied to the price tag, of course, without wanting to go down that route again and ask someone's recruitment. But those Daniel Farke quotes that this is Timu Puki's heir apparent, I don't think they did him any favours. But by the same token, what is he? I think we can see a player with some potential, but what is he? What is he? What can he become for Norwich City? And if he plays as that lineup graphic seems to suggest as the central one in a forward three today, yes, okay, it's a glorified training exercise, but that'd be good to see him playing in what he probably feels, if you would speak to him, is his natural position and one that he feels maybe is where he wants to play his football moving forward. So yes, it's about fitness, but it's also about catching Dean Smith's eye and for the bigger, more testing parts of pre-season and then into the championship. So interesting one for me is how Sargent goes today, I think. What's your initial thoughts, Sam? I'll throw that one back to you when you saw that team news.
I think it's probably a big one for Todd Cantwell because he's gone for that, by the looks of things, that 4-3-3 situation. Again, in terms of the two slightly more attacking midfielders, looks like Jakob Sorensen is in the more defensive role. So Todd Cantwell's going to have to get up and down perhaps a little bit more than he's maybe used to, and he's probably going to have to do a bit more of the physical side than he may have been thought of as his forte previously. Obviously, against Dereham, we spoke about it on the podcast again. He was notionally in that position, but when you're playing against a team that's that far back in their own half, everyone's sort of a number 10 apart from a couple of centre backs and maybe the goalie. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he gets on in that role. Slightly disappointed, I should probably say at this point that we're not expecting a stream, unfortunately. Just connectivity issues from what we've heard. So I'm slightly disappointed that we're not going to be able to assess Cantwell with our own eyes and how he gets on in that role. But it feels like a big game for me. Also worth noting is that I think, and I haven't consulted it again, but I think from memory that team has none of the sort of under 23s players that they've brought with them, not even Springett and Rowe, who are sort of halfway between under 23s and first team at the moment. So clearly Smith is trying to move it on from that sort of early stage of pre-season where it's just sort of minutes for a lot of players, and I think he's maybe trying to get a look at certain players. As Paddy said earlier, I don't think this is going to be the game to judge whether Norwich are going to win the championship off, but you can see things already sort of starting to ramp up. Another name worth mentioning is Andrew Omobamidele. Obviously, we talked about him before the lineup came out, and he seemed to be pretty well involved. Played in that sort of internal 11 v 11, and was fairly impressive in that. So he's not involved at all. He's not even on the bench. So hopefully that's not a sign of any sort of setback or anything like that. Obviously we'll ask Dean Smith about that. But do you think we can maybe allay fans' fears a little bit by saying that this is pre-season and these things are slightly fluid and you never know for sure who's going to be involved?
Yeah, to be honest, I was too busy looking down the list for Isaac Hayden. Yeah, I mean, no Omobamidele, which is a surprise, given that he was involved midweek in that practice game. We certainly, from our remote vantage at this point, hope it isn't anything in terms of a setback. I'm sure Dean Smith will be asked by the club media after the game regarding Andrew Omobamidele because that man deserves a bit of luck in terms of his recent fitness issues, but. Again, maybe it's just a softly approach. As you say, I mean, it does underline that a large swathe of those 23s involved at Dereham who are out there with them aren't in this lineup. Now, whether, I'm just looking at it and, it says starting 11 and subs. If they are playing the 330s, are these the pool of players from which the 330s are going to be drawn? We don't know that definitively. So is it hypothetically some of those younger players and an Omobamidele, will they come in for the second 30 or third 30? I'd be surprised. You think the players who are going to feature would be on that team sheet. But, ultimately, until we put that to Dean Smith, it's very hard to say definitively if there's an issue with Omobamidele. But I do know Sinani's on there and, we've not even touched on him. There's so many subplots here at the minute and on El, actually. But Sinani... what an opportunity that man could have. There's a lot of flux in the wider areas. We see the reports around Jolis. Wahets has already gone out of the building. Is there a way back for Daniel Sanani? And very intriguing case that, because there's a player who was within 90 minutes of getting to the Premier League, and you speak to a lot of Huddersfield fans last season, and he did bring something to the party for a team who are at the right end of the Championship. So, it's not a stretch to think that he could come in and force his way in, but again, it just underlines for me there's certain areas of this squad where they look very well stocked, and there is strength in depth, and maybe one or two areas that isn't the case, and they'll be aware of that. And I'm sure they'll want to address that between now and the end of the window. I have got the SSV lineup in front of me, Sam, but I'm guessing we don't really need to share that. I don't think that's going to make too much difference, is it?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure. Maybe there's some German fans of the Pink and aren't going to be too happy with us for that. But I'm sure there are various areas where you can access.
Go to their Twitter feed is what I would say. Then just go to their official Twitter feed.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, may well be more informative than the Norwich Twitter feed at the moment, given how long we were made to wait for that lineup. But yeah, thankfully we've eventually brought you a lineup video with a little bit of bonus transfer content. Keep across the game on Pink and channels. Obviously, going to be slightly difficult given it's going to be more difficult for us to keep up with than most games. But we'll still have a match report post game. Paddy's pointers will still be available for Pink and Plus app subscribers. So, yeah.
What I would say, Sam. I mean, as we said earlier, we're sadly here in the fine city. Not sadly, but that's where we are at the minute. Well, I am anyway. You're soon to be here. That's a different podcast. But we do have a photographer on the ground, and so we definitely will have a gallery as soon as we can after the final whistle from the game. So that's definitely something we can promise and deliver.
Yep, and who doesn't want to look at a gallery with that lovely new home strip? Maybe they've got one on the way to Brazil right now. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and keep across Pink and channels, the Pink and app for all the coverage around this game, and we'll see you again very soon.